everybody again for joining us. So, Excellencies, Mr. Secretary-General, distinguished panelists, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today for the CERF High-level Pledging Event. The CERF is the first and the fastest, and it looks after the forgotten. And I'm really pleased today that we're joined not just by the Secretary-General, but by a distinguished group of panelists. The Minister of Labour and Social Development in Sudan, Ms. Lena El Sheikh Omar Majou, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mr. Steve Mbikai, the Vice Minister and Deputy Director General for International Cooperation in the Netherlands, Ms. Brigitte Tazelaar, the Director General for Crisis Prevention, Stabilisation, Peace Building and Humanitarian Assistance at the German Federal Foreign Office, Sibila Sora, and the Executive Director of the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, Mr. Asif Saleh. And today, as the world faces the greatest humanitarian challenges in over a generation, we've never needed the CERF more. Everywhere I travel, even if these days my travels are sometimes virtual, I hear stories from real people who get help thanks to the CERF. I spoke the other day to Adama, a 42-year-old widow in Burkina Faso, whose village was attacked by gunmen last year, leaving her husband and other family members dead. In a place like Burkina Faso, where conflict and displacement are increasing faster than anyone can keep up, the CERF is a critical tool. Quick CERF funding helps humanitarian partners scale up and meet the needs of people like Adama and her children. Last week, we published the Global Humanitarian Overview for 2021. 235 million people will need humanitarian assistance and protection next year. That's 40% more compared with what we projected this time last year, and it's almost entirely down to COVID-19. In 2020, the CERF's value particularly stood out in 4 areas. First, thanks to staunch support of its donors, CERF has seen a consistent increase in funding over recent years. Last year, record contributions brought it close to our $1 billion target. That enabled CERF to tackle huge humanitarian challenges at a scale never seen before, with unprecedented impact. The focus was on those places where needs are greatest, places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Second, CERF's COVID response enabled the humanitarian system to respond quickly and effectively to new needs, embracing innovative approaches to do so. When the pandemic came with all its uncertainties, so the CERF prioritized flexibility. It gave block grants to UN agencies to allow them to target effort where they saw the greatest needs. When travel shut down, CERF supported the transportation of humanitarian goods and workers to crisis zones. And when the threat of gender-based violence increased in lockdown, CERF prioritized help for women and girls in its allocations. Thirdly, a larger CERF has also enabled us to accelerate the agenda on anticipatory action where shocks are predictable and can be mitigated. The CERF funded innovative anticipatory approaches in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And fourth, a larger CERF has helped achieve results in 4 consistently underfunded areas of humanitarian response: support for women and girls, for people living with disabilities, for education, and for protection. So I thank all of you here who helped support the CERF this year. Your generosity has helped more than 65 million people get food, healthcare, shelter, and protection. More donors are providing multi-year funding. That's helped CERF operate at its fullest potential, and we hope others will start to do the same thing. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, we do need to reach the goal we set in 2016 for $1 billion CERF. Thank you. I'm now delighted to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. António Guterres, the Secretary-General of the United Nations. SG, you have the floor.
Very much, Mark. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to join you in support of the Central Emergency Response Fund. The CERF is unique. It is quick, it is non-bureaucratic, and it is sometimes the only source of funds for a true emergency response because other funding may be too late to be effective. CERF is the instrument that enables us to act in forgotten crises that do not attract donor funding. And it is an important tool. When I was taking refugees, I did action for refugees. Humanitarian action must be principled, coordinated, fast, and agile. The CERF delivers consistently on all these fronts. And I must tell you, in my experience, I never found any other international financial instrument, both in humanitarian or in development actions, better than the CERF. It fosters joint action across the United Nations system, from analysis of needs to coordinated planning and prioritization. And this enables UN humanitarian agencies and their partners to act together, quickly, and at scale. In the chaos of a humanitarian emergency, that makes an enormous difference. CERF funding is one of the most effective ways to help people trapped in sudden and deteriorating crises. It reaches the underfunded emergencies that have fallen off the world's radar or were never on it. In 2020, CERF provided a record $225 million to 20 underfunded and neglected crises. Excellencies, this has been a year like no other. The COVID-19 pandemic has added another layer of suffering on top of existing crises caused by conflict and intensifying impacts of climate change. And in this very difficult environment, the CERF was a resounding success. In 2020, it gave more than $820 million to fund life-saving assistance to people in 52 countries. This is the highest amount ever allocated in a single year, appropriately for this year of unprecedented crisis, and a testament to the commitment of its donors. Swift support from the CERF to combat devastating swarms of desert locusts in the Horn of Africa helped the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization scale up its control efforts. When airstrikes and shelling in Syria forced nearly 300,000 people from their homes, CERF helped humanitarian agencies provide emergency shelter, food, and water. When Ebola broke out once again in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, CERF supported health services to track cases and provide treatment. And I went there and I saw it. And within days of the announcement of the COVID-19 pandemic, CERF was helping to buy protective equipment, stock hospitals, establish supply chains and logistic hubs, and launch information campaigns. As the effects of the pandemic accumulated in vulnerable countries, CERF allocated $220 million to provide life-saving assistance to 65 million people across 48 countries. And CERF also responded to the secondary effects of the crisis. It allocated $100 million to 7 countries in Africa and the Middle East to support people at risk of hunger. And this year, CERF allocated a record $65 million to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, a growing threat and the pandemic-related lockdowns and quarantines. This funding encouraged other agencies to prioritize and dedicate resources. 2020 also marked an important milestone for the CERF. For the first time, it funded anticipatory action. In June, CERF provided funds to avert a food crisis in Somalia. And in July, when record rainfall was forecast in Bangladesh, CERF paid for essential supplies and helped families to protect themselves and their livelihoods. This assistance reached more people, more quickly, and at half the cost of the previous year's operation. Across the humanitarian system, momentum is building for this anticipatory approach. Helping people to take action preemptively before a crisis strikes is both more effective and cheaper than responding after they have been hit. Excellencies, in 2016, the General Assembly endorsed my call to bring CERF's annual funding target to $1 billion in line with rapidly increasing humanitarian needs. In 2019, member states and partners responded generously, contributing a record $835 million. 54 member states that received CERF funding went on to contribute to it, a sign of the CERF's unique status as a fund by all for all. But this year, while the world faces its worst humanitarian crisis in many decades, we are only halfway to our target with 495 million received. A 1 billion CERF is a bare minimum to effectively help people trapped in emergencies. If all member states and partners allocate a small percentage of their humanitarian funding through the CERF, we can reach our target. I urge those that have not contributed yet to make decisions quickly and act on your commitments. I also urge you to consider multi-year arrangements. Guaranteed, predictable funding enables CERF to operate to its fullest potential. An investment in the CERF is an investment in humanity. Thank you.
Secretary-General, thank you very much indeed. We would like now to show you a short video that highlights some of the things that CERF has done in 2020. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is the second largest recipient of CERF funding in 2020. We provided $40 million in response to the Ebola outbreak, $30 million for the humanitarian response plan, and more recently, $7 million to address increasing food insecurity. So, Excellency, may I please invite you to comment on how CERF has supported the Ebola response and the difference it's going to make in addressing food insecurity. You have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has, for almost 25 years now, been facing recurring and prolonged humanitarian crises. This means that my country has been one of the greatest beneficiaries of the CERF in the world since it was established in 2006. For this year, I'd like to recall that the humanitarian response plan in the Democratic Republic of the Congo remains underfunded. At the same time, needs are increasing. Thus, swift and effective assistance from the CERF through its 3 allocations of a total of $77 million was essential in order to complete the response to the most pressing needs. Indeed, at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has limited travel and humanitarian access, which has had a catastrophic socioeconomic impact on the most vulnerable households, the majority of these households had no other choice than to survive with the little that they earned. And crucially, they saw their means of survival affected greatly. The CERF, in its first allocation, also contributed to maintaining means of subsistence for the people in this difficult time caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, the CERF saved many lives from the upheavals caused by the Ebola epidemic in the east of our country. At the time, 2,267 deaths had been recorded out of 3,463 cases. The CERF dispersed $40 million to strengthen community engagement and to provide assistance to 1.4 million people with multi-sectoral forms of support. Also, I'd also like to clarify that these community projects for affected people also contributed to increase the acceptance of humanitarian and government workers. This allocation of $40 million also allowed us to support survivors as well as early warning mechanisms, and allowed us to strengthen healthcare services and humanitarian services in 29 healthcare zones. Lastly, the recent CERF allocation of $7 million provided essential support for families in urgent need of food assistance. Because of conflicts, many communities were not able to farm their land. This assistance allowed them to face an emergency and to survive these periods of food distribution. Thanks to the cash programming, our partners were able to reach a large number of people more quickly and more effectively when we compared with what would be required to transport several tons of food. These rapid allocations allowed us to save thousands of lives and to alleviate human suffering. The people and the government of the DRC are very grateful for this. Excellencies, distinguished panelists. As I conclude my statement, I'd like to raise the issue of my country's government to the CERF. In my capacity as Minister for Humanitarian Action and National Solidarity, I will request the DRC's government contribution to the CERF from the Prime Minister, and I will, if necessary, inform the CERF Secretariat of the amount of this contribution. The CERF is a fund by all that is by all and for all. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Member States for their generous contributions to this fund. I hope that this high-level event will allow us to broaden the donor base. If there's a time when we must all demonstrate solidarity and support the CERF, well, it is now. And together we will manage it. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister very much indeed for his statement, and I would like now to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Lina El-Sheikh, who's the Minister of Labour and Social Development in Sudan. In 2020, Sudan is the largest recipient of CERF funding, and this year we provided a standalone grant to support the most vulnerable, including to address COVID-19. So, Excellency, may I please invite you to say a few words on the impact that CERF has had in your country? You have the floor. Okay, it appears we might have a connection problem with Khartoum. So I'm going to move on while we try to fix that. We made 2 grants this year, 2 allocations this year from the CERF for Syria. And we'd like to show you now a video illustrating the work that CERF did with that money. Let's show the video.
أنا اسمي أحمد، عمري 12 سنة، نزحنا على عدد المخيم تح، صرنا نازحين سنة، وقضيت حياتي هي الخيمة. بسبب فيروس كورونا ما عم بقدر أروح على المدرسة. أنا أهلي بخافوا علينا كثير وما بخلونا نطلع برا البيت. أنا ما بعرف شيء عن فيروس كورونا، بس خايف منه لأنه عم بموت الناس مثل ما عم بموتوا بالقصف.
I'd like to turn next to Ms. Sibylle Sorg, who is the Director General for Crisis Prevention of the Federal Foreign Office in Germany, as I mentioned earlier. In addition to being CERF's largest donor in 2020, for which many thanks, since the establishment of CERF, Germany has contributed more than $660 million and has steadily increased its funding since 2010. So we're extremely grateful for your strong support and your championing of CERF, Sibylle. And I would be grateful if you would share your perspective with us of why the CERF is a good investment for humanitarian action. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mark. Secretary-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Being a big CERF donor is quite a new experience, actually, for us. In fact, Germany is a latecomer in this business. Our first pledge to CERF was in 2007 only, and our contribution at the time was a modest $5 million. Since then, our CERF contribution has consistently grown and passed the $100 million threshold this year. I want to emphasize that this is not simply a reflection of the fact that Germany's humanitarian assistance budget has significantly increased in the same period. On the contrary, it was a conscious decision on our part for various reasons. Let me name a few. First, what CERF is trying to achieve is of compelling simplicity from our point of view, focusing on strictly life-saving humanitarian interventions, acting where the humanitarian system at large is struggling the most, quickly responding to the outbreak of humanitarian crises, and providing a fair share to those forgotten protracted crises that do not receive enough attention. Second, our assessment of CERF is broadly shared in the Bundestag, our federal parliament, mainly for 2 reasons: CERF's efficacy and reactivity. And third, CERF has become one of the key drivers of change in the humanitarian system. If we want to address the ever-growing humanitarian needs worldwide, we must act more effectively and more efficiently. And we must complement the important task of improving our response on the one hand, with anticipating risks and act before the outbreak of a crisis on the other. For the past 5 years, Germany has been advocating for anticipatory action, especially forecast-based financing approaches. 3 years ago, we proposed anticipatory action to be included into the CERF's approach. It is testimony to your commitment, Mark, that this proposal was not only accepted and operationalized. We already have a track record of its implementation with CERF interventions in Bangladesh, as the General Secretary mentioned, and in Somalia. I'm sure the CERF will continue to drive this important paradigm shift within the humanitarian system. Let me add a second example, where we see that the CERF as a driver of change. The underfunding of a number of very important areas of humanitarian assistance, above all, the gender dimension and protection. When cases of gender-based violence were soaring during the pandemic, many millions of US dollars were allocated for GBV projects. This allocation had a catalytic effect and increased the number of GBV projects even beyond this specific allocation. In this regard, I would also like to highlight the allocation of $25 million for UN Women and UNFPA to support gender equality and GBV prevention that you, Mark, announced just recently. So in a nutshell, it is the CERF's efficiency and its function as a driver of change that convince us to provide substantial funding and to remain strongly committed to the fund. And this brings me to our pledge for today. First of all, I'm glad to announce that we will top up our contribution for 2020 by an additional 10 million euros, bringing it to a total of 110 million euros. But it is not only the amount of money provided that counts. As the Secretary-General has put it so eloquently, the predictability of funding is key. So today I announce that we will enter into a multi-year agreement with the CERF and pledge 150 million euros. That is 50 million euros as a first contribution for the years 21, 22, and 23. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much indeed, both for your new pledge for 2020 and your multi-year pledge, but also for explaining to everybody why this is a priority for Germany's humanitarian assistance. I'm really delighted now to give the floor to Birgitte Tazelaar, who's the Deputy Director General for International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. I'd like to acknowledge that this year, the Netherlands is CERF's second largest donor. I extend my sincere appreciation for your support. So can I ask you, Birgitte, to tell us how you see the role of the CERF at the moment? Apologies, Birgitte. Can I just ask the technician if there's something we can do on the sound? Go.
Yes, ma'am. I heard you speaking earlier. I think maybe your headphones are interfering with your connection. Can you unplug them?
Is this better? Okay.
Yes,
yes, Birgitte, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I think UN Secretary-General Guterres explained very well what the value is of the CERF as an emergency response. The global reach, the impact, flexibility, speed, attention for acute and forgotten crisis, and the way you also drive innovation. And I would really like to compliment OCHA for its leadership in coordinating the CERF, in coordinating the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much for that, Mark. And for us, really partnering with the CERF is through a multi-year agreement is a no-brainer. As you know, a key element of the Grand Bargain is the fundamental value of unearmarked multi-year funding for speedy and effective humanitarian action, and the Netherlands walks that talk. So CERF is a case in point of quality funding. This is the best way to help people in need, whether it's in the Horn of Africa, Sahel, DRC. But we need more donors. And this will help to address the challenges sketched in the Global Humanitarian Overview 2021. Because we know that the secondary impact of COVID-19 is devastating, and you mentioned the figures. I don't need to repeat them. But in the meantime, I must say we consider CERF funding not as a blank check. We think and work based on partnership, not in the sense of extensive reporting requirements, but in the sense of engagement, trust, and openness, because that's what partnership is about. And I want to give you 3 examples. The first one relates to the Grand Bargain. We really want to jointly work on advancing the Grand Bargain objectives, including through opportunities provided by the CERF. And well, supporting, for example, supporting collaborative multi-year planning and financing to partners. And I think what the CERF pilot did in Bangladesh is a very good example. Secondly, by strengthening localization. Funds allocated by CERF to UN partners need to be transferred to NGOs as quickly and timely as possible, whenever that would strengthen the response, and engage them as much as possible to incorporate also their voice. And that can be the CERF's contribution to localization. Or by supporting cash programming, and your assistance to the DRC of $80 million for cash programming is, I think, a very good example there. Not only DRC, also 5 other countries, obviously. And the second example of partnership is on themes such as MHPSS and SEA. The protection against sexual abuse and exploitation is essential. And here also the scandal in the DRC, what it showed was, it exposed again deep flaws. We need to prevent and respond to SEA in a way that guarantees dignity of those that report SEA. And there's also a need for attention to strengthen mental and psychosocial support in the humanitarian response. And I welcome the fact that MHPSS is recognized as a cross-cutting theme by the IASC principles. And I look forward to work with OCHA to make the response funded through CERF more MHPSS inclusive and traceable. The third example is the partnership to close the humanitarian financing gap. The Netherlands also stands for CERF being a fund by all, not only for all. Although donors contributed a record high of 17 billion towards humanitarian aid in 2020, only $500 million went to CERF. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic demanded more flexibility than ever to fund, for example, critical logistics and humanitarian supply chain services. This is a collective responsibility. This year, barely 50 donors to CERF. There are only barely 50 donors to CERF, and we need to broaden the donor base. So I call upon other donors and private sector to channel support through CERF. And the Netherlands stands ready to work with you and to strengthen that outreach. Overall, of course, we are concerned about the gap between the humanitarian needs and the available humanitarian financing. A high-level panel looked at the humanitarian financing gap back in 2015 and made recommendations, including on the Grand Bargain. But we need to look at these recommendations again and assess progress in the last years to address the financing gap. So we need to see what lessons learned are and how to move forward. So that's really more important now than ever. And we, the Netherlands, just launched, or we are about to launch a study, and we will seek an opportunity to discuss the results further next year. I'm rounding up. We need to work together with OCHA, UN organizations, NGOs, receiving and donor countries to strengthen the humanitarian response through CERF further. With needs rising as a result of more and more protected conflicts and growing poverty, we need also to be more decisively bridge the humanitarian development divide. And since the humanitarian system cannot solve humanitarian crisis, barely manage, we also have to strengthen our efforts to address root causes of crisis. Mark, I wish you a very enriching meeting. I will leave the pledge to my fellow country person, Mariette, later on, but I will promise you that we will transfer the money very quickly in the first quarter so that you are as flexible as possible to address the needs next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. For the first time in 2020, CERF has allocated funds directly to NGOs. And today we're joined by the Executive Director of BRAC, the leading Bangladeshi and global civil society organization, Mr. Asif Saleh. BRAC, which is one of the organizations which receive funds to support the COVID-19 response around the world, therefore is in an important position to reflect on this CERF innovation. So Asif, I'm very pleased to give you the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mark, for giving me and BRAC the opportunity to speak today. Your Excellencies and dignitaries, as the saying goes, that the only constant we have is change. In Bangladesh's Rohingya camps, the only certainty we have is crisis. BRAC has been working in Bangladesh for almost 50 years now, with close to 100,000 staff and health workers. It has also now become the largest national civil society responder in these camps, but we have very little certainty of what is going to happen tomorrow in the camps. I mean, founded in 1972 to assist the war-ravaged population following Bangladesh's independence in 1971, BRAC has led response, recovery, rehabilitation, and poverty eradication in this country at large scale. But nothing prepared us for the kind of Herculean humanitarian response that needed to happen when the largest influx of Rohingya refugees into Bangladesh happened in late 2017. It quickly became the largest refugee camp in the world with a population of almost 1 million people, many of whom had experienced indescribable trauma, packed into an area with an average population density of 40,000 people per square kilometer with absolutely no facilities. The situation has significantly improved since then. People have basic necessities thanks to the government of Bangladesh, the local community, the UN, supported by donor countries, and hundreds of humanitarian workers of NGOs like ours working on the ground tirelessly. But at any point, a crisis can strike. Every April or November, when the cyclone season starts, we hold our collective breath in this coastal town. But in 2020, even the more unexpected happened. Bangladesh, along with the world, was hit with COVID-19 pandemic from early March. We feared that the worst would happen in such a densely populated space. This was compounded by a super cyclone in May, and we started the recovery process from the lockdown. In August, this was followed by the longest flooding in 3 decades. So Bangladesh has seen it all this year. But it's not just about 2020. Learning to live with the uncertainty seems to be part of the new normal. The nature and the scale of humanitarian crisis is changing globally, and they are becoming even less predictable. The protracted conflict in Syria, the forced mass exodus of Rohingyas in Myanmar, the shocking intensity of weather events triggered by climate change, humanitarian crises today are longer, more intense, and more disruptive. So how can the global community respond to this? One way is to directly fund credible local NGOs to take rapid action in crisis, like it happened in the Rohingya camps this year. BRAC's work in the Rohingya camps was already funded by a number of UN organizations. But when COVID hit, no additional funds were available immediately for the changing needs: water, health, hand washing, and mask support. UN CERF's rapid funding of $540,000 enabled BRAC to take immediate action. We focused on the lowest hanging fruits, rapidly improving access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for almost 75,000 people, half of which were women, and supporting that with hygiene promotion. We focused specifically on addressing access, protection, and privacy for the most vulnerable groups: the elderly, persons with disabilities, and women and girls. Not all funding is the same. In a crisis, rapid, direct, and flexible funding can have the biggest impact. In this case, we saw 3 key results in the camps: very low numbers of COVID cases compared to what was predicted, access-enabled sanitation for people with mobility issues, and women and girls protected through gender-separated facilities and improved lighting. CERF's pace and agility in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular the allocation through IOM to support frontline NGOs like ours in delivering life-saving health, water, and sanitation assistance, played an important role in this. So my call to action to the global community today is to ensure generous funding to CERF, in particular to ensure continued progress towards the 1 billion CERF as agreed by the UN member states at the General Assembly in 2016. As we rapidly head into a deeply unpredictable decade, which is likely to be dominated by crises inflicted by climate change and political clashes, mobilization of resources for speed and flexibility will be the foundation to an effective response. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Everyone is safe, as the pandemic has taught us. We all need to come together, each with our respective resources, knowledge, capacity, and skills. And more importantly, we will need to ensure that emergency funds are made quickly available for credible local humanitarian responders during the crisis. I thank you all again for your time and support for those who are most in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Asif. And we'd like to show you a video now of some of the work that's been done in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar. Please show the video.
নদী এলাকা ভাঙ্গন এলাকার মানুষ নদীতে আমাদের বাড়ি ঘর ছিল সেখান থেকে ভাঙ্গে আমরা কিছুদিন ধরে এখানে আসছি
ঘরে যাওয়া হইলে ঘর সব পানি পেয়েছে তলার বাব হয়েছে ঢোকা যায় না
আমার গরু বাছুর না কষ্ট ঘাস নাই মানুষের খাবার নাই কামাই করা যায় না পানির জন্য টাকা পাইছি টাকা দেয়া চাইল আনছি আলু আনছি ডাল আনছি লবণ মরিচ আনছি পোলাহানের খাবার দাবার আনছি
Okay, so we're going to try again to see if we can establish the link with Khartoum. Apologies for the difficulties so far, Minister, but please go ahead and we look forward to hearing from you. Okay, so apologies everybody for that. We'll keep trying to work on that problem and failing the ability to establish the connection, we will post the Minister's important remarks, which I can assure you are well worth studying and pay attention to. We will make them available to everybody if we can't fix the connection later in the meeting. That brings us to the end of the opening session. We'd like to now move on to the pledging segment of the meeting where we hear from all of you. And I'm delighted first to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rashid Meredov, who's the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs from Turkmenistan. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Your Excellency Secretary-General, Mr. Secretary-General, Your Excellency Emergency Relief Coordinator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to be part of this CERF High-level Pledging Event. This year marks 15th anniversary since UN General Assembly adopted its resolution to establish the fund. For years of existence, CERF has proved that it is only globally effective instrument for providing protection and rapid life-saving assistance to people affected by humanitarian crisis. In 2020, when WHO declared COVID-19 a global health emergency and later pandemic, fund has responded in a timely, efficient, and flexible manner. Turkmenistan commends CERF's approach to adjust its ongoing projects to the changing needs and operational constraints. Turkmenistan and its president are based on the principles of humanism, on a regular basis provide assistance to countries in need in the region and beyond to overcome difficulties caused by emergencies of natural, man-made, and other nature. Noting the importance of a coordinated and systematic approach to minimize the negative socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the efforts of the global community to respond to emergencies. Our country firmly believes that financial support for CERF by UN member states will intensify and the emergency preventive and response mechanism. In order to support the global activities implemented by the fund, at the beginning of this year, Turkmenistan made a voluntary contribution at the amount $100,000. In this regard, let me assure you of our intention to further participate in the activities of the fund and inform that in 2021, Turkmenistan will allocate $100,000 to the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund. This was also mentioned in the letter of the President of Turkmenistan addressed to the United Nations Secretary-General. Turkmenistan stands ready to continue close cooperation with the fund in reaching more people affected by humanitarian crisis. Thank you very much, Excellency.
I thank the Minister very much indeed for his statement and his pledge, and I give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Nasser Bourita, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation and Moroccan expatriates in Morocco. Excellency, you have the floor. Can we hear, please, from the Minister from Morocco? I see the permanent representative online. Thank you for joining us, Omar. Minister, go ahead. Okay, unfortunately, there seems to be a problem with that link. So what we'll do, Excellency, with your permission, is we'll try and fix the problem and we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes if we can. So let me move on now to the United Kingdom, to His Excellency Mr. Nick Dyer, the Special Envoy for Famine Prevention and Humanitarian Affairs for the United Kingdom. Please, Nick, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Mark, I just brought the UK back into the room. He was signed out. Should be here now, Mr. Dyer.
Mark, my minister is on now.
Okay, all right. So, Excellencies, we can now see the Minister in Rabat. Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs, thank you so much for joining us. Please, you have the floor, and then I will bring in the UK. Go ahead, Rabat.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary-General, Mr. Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to commend the Secretary-General of UN, His Excellency Mr. António Guterres, for the relevant guidance set out in his opening remarks to the 2020 CERF High-level Pledging Event to ensure that the fund is fit to respond to the alarming humanitarian needs. I also would like to take this opportunity to highlight the leadership of His Excellency Mark Lowcock in increasing the donors' commitment to the CERF. In 2020, $730 million were allocated by CERF to people affected by conflicts, diseases, and climate disasters around the world. The Kingdom of Morocco, as donor and member of the CERF Advisory Council, highly values the fund's added value in enabling fast, timely, and more coordinated responses to emergency crises. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in a message addressed to the participants to the First World Humanitarian Summit held in May in Istanbul, His Majesty King Mohammed VI noted, and I quote, "Ever since my accession to the throne of the Kingdom of Morocco, I have keenly sought to make humanitarian work one of the pillars of the Kingdom's foreign policy. I'm particularly proud that Morocco has made significant contributions to alleviating the impact of humanitarian crises wherever they happen, especially in the countries of the South." End of quote. The Kingdom of Morocco has been actively and consistently contributing to mitigating the impact of the humanitarian crisis around the world through its effective participation in peacekeeping operations and humanitarian actions around the world. Under the high instructions of His Majesty the King, the Royal Armed Forces deployed 17 military hospitals and provided 2.5 million services to local population and refugees in 14 countries across several continents. Morocco attaches great importance to building bridges between humanitarian and development projects, for example, in the Sahel. And Morocco, as chair of the humanitarian segment of ECOSOC, has launched a widely supported call for action to support the humanitarian response in the fight against COVID-19. Even in time of pandemic, Morocco's solidarity has never failed. Under the initiative of His Majesty the King, Morocco has equipped some 25 African countries to help them cope with the COVID-19. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we are facing unprecedented humanitarian needs today, every contribution is important. It helps alleviate suffering. It gives hope to the most vulnerable, and brings us closer to the universal goal to leaving no one behind. The Kingdom's contribution to the CERF's annual budget is a concrete expression of its humanitarian commitment. In this respect, I'm pleased to announce that the Kingdom of Morocco has decided to significantly increase its contribution to the CERF's annual budget by allocating $100,000 for the year 2021. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister, for your statement and your pledge. So I'm going to go now to the United Kingdom, and then I'll come to the Foreign Minister from Maldives, and then to Canada. The UK, Special Envoy Nick Dyer, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for everybody else's contributions on the call as well. The UK is absolutely clear that the CERF plays a particularly critical and unique and innovative role in the humanitarian system. And we're the UK proud, since the CERF has been created, to be its largest donor, contributing over $1.5 billion. In 2019, as we all know, we faced a widening gap between the humanitarian need and funding, and the UK provided an exceptional uplift of £300 million to the CERF. Much of this was used in early 2020, when the CERF was one of the first humanitarian actors to respond to COVID-19. Indeed, the CERF responded with remarkable speed, rigour and agility. And the CERF's recent $100 million allocation to tackle the threat in the highest risk countries is an excellent example of this, and one of the main reasons why we continue to be a multi-year funder to the CERF. Unfortunately, as Mark laid out earlier, the humanitarian funding gap continues to widen. We hosted the London of the GHO last week, which was a very sobering outlook for 2021. There's a real risk of famine also materializing in Nigeria, South Sudan, Yemen, and Burkina Faso. And we must maintain a strong collective focus on food insecurity and famine risk in order to avert the worst humanitarian suffering. 2020 really has been an unprecedented year, but 2021 will be even more challenging. We are therefore announcing that the UK will contribute a further £56 million in 2020, this month, to the CERF. This will bring the UK's total 2020 contribution to close to $90 million. This demonstrates that despite difficult financial conditions, we continue to place extremely high value on the essential work performed by the CERF and the wider UN humanitarian system. We urge other donors to similarly prioritise the UN's life-saving work, including the CERF, as they make their own difficult choices at home. This commitment is a recognition of the size of the need and the effectiveness of the CERF. Indeed, as the international community continues to address this unprecedented situation, CERF remains rapid, life-saving and effective. We also welcome CERF's continued work on piloting anticipatory action, which we know can help reduce need in the long term. The UK salutes Mark Lowcock, the CERF team and all at OCHA for their unstinting efforts. The world needs a high-impact, well-resourced and effective CERF as never before. As the UK continues to support the CERF, we encourage all other existing and potential donors to give generously. A contribution to the CERF genuinely will save lives. Contributing to the CERF is one of the most effective ways we can help respond to humanitarian need, along with continuing to explore alternative funding sources and pairing financing with humanitarian diplomacy.
Thank you very much indeed, not least for your statement about major additional funding for 2020. And I'm pleased to give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Maldives. Please go ahead, sir.
Dear colleagues, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Secretary-General and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs for convening this timely event. I would also like to commend Mr. Mark Lowcock, the Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief and Coordination, for the wonderful work that has been carried out. Excellencies, there is no doubt that the unprecedented trials of this year have left people around the world to depend on the critical and life-saving work of the Central Emergency Response Fund. The COVID-19 pandemic has created extraordinary challenges in its own right, magnifying the harm inflicted by conflicts, extreme weather, and the ongoing effects of climate change. The Maldives knows too well the daunting challenges European states face in responding to the intersection of these events that will remain long after the pandemic has abated. CERF's swift and targeted disbursement of assistance meaningfully improve the global response to COVID-19 and other humanitarian threats over the past year. In responding to crises, especially a global pandemic such as COVID-19 that presents the risk of exponential spread, $1 million spent on day one might save $1 billion on day 100. CERF's rapid response and anticipatory actions in response to COVID-19, flooding, droughts, and other emergencies contributed substantially to mitigating the humanitarian impact of these events. CERF also demonstrated prudence in its funding of UN agencies, which could in turn utilize their expertise to allocate resources to the areas of greatest need. The Maldives appreciates CERF's continued efforts to disperse aid to the most vulnerable populations and to fund the most underfunded humanitarian efforts. Those countries with the fewest resources are often the hardest hit by conflict, natural disasters, and other crises. We applaud the work of CERF. We applaud the work CERF has done to assist these countries and its relentless efforts to prioritize aid for women and girls and persons with disabilities. Excellencies, as a fund for all, by all, CERF embodies the spirit of multilateralism and collective action that we must embrace in order to respond quickly and effectively to urgent humanitarian crises across the globe. To express our solidarity with CERF, CERF's indispensable and life-saving work, despite the economic difficulties and challenges the Maldives faces, we have made a symbolic contribution to the fund, and we encourage donors worldwide to continue to support the fund's commendable humanitarian efforts. I thank you, sir.
I thank the Minister very much indeed for his statement, and I'm pleased now to move to Canada, to the Minister for Development, the Honourable Karina Gould. Karina, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, and it really is a pleasure to be here today and to pledge Canada's renewed support to the UN Central Emergency Response Fund. Canada has been a strong and consistent supporter of the CERF since its inception. Building on our long-standing support, I am proud to announce Canada's renewed funding to the CERF in the form of a multi-year contribution of $88.2 million over the next 3 years. Over the past decade, humanitarian needs have been on the rise. As we look towards 2021, humanitarian needs have now reached record-breaking and heartbreaking levels, compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this context, the CERF remains a vital lifeline for the most vulnerable people of the world, particularly for those living through the most neglected humanitarian crises. We also recognize the continued efforts to improve this life-saving tool to meet new challenges and our evolving world. The CERF's rapid disbursement of humanitarian funding at the global level and support to frontline NGOs has been critical to addressing the impact of COVID-19. Canada welcomed the $5.5 million envelope CERF will be using to respond to the increase in sexual and gender-based violence exacerbated by pandemic restrictions. We also commend the CERF for moving towards more gender equality programming, including the recently announced $25 million to support women-led organizations that prevent and respond to sexual and gender-based violence in humanitarian crises. COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of global solidarity. The CERF is an indispensable tool, a fund for all, by all, to help us face complex humanitarian challenges together. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, not least for your generous multi-year pledge there. I am pleased now to move to Belgium and to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Mariam Katir, the Minister for Development Cooperation from Belgium. Madam Minister, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Under-Secretary-General, Excellencies. The Global Humanitarian Overview 2021 paints a bleak picture. Extreme poverty is rising for the first time in decades. Never have there been more people displaced by conflict. To be able to assist in 2021, 160 million of the 235 million people needing humanitarian assistance and protection, a staggering of $35 billion is required. Belgium believes in principle and coordinated assistance. We very much value the CERF as a fund for all, by all. It is a truly educated tool to ensure timely, coordinated and flexible aid and protection for millions of people around the world. Women and girls suffer disproportionately in humanitarian contexts. Even more of them risk being out of school, die during childbirth, or face gender-based violence. Belgium welcomes the recent dedicated CERF allocation. More support to women-led organizations and the strengthening of women leaderships and organizations at local level is paramount. Excellencies, it is crucial to make the resource readily available whenever disaster strikes. Since CERF's inception in 2006, my country has been a loyal partner. Therefore, our flexible funding has increased steadily over the past years. For CERF in particular, we are pleased to announce that our annual contribution for next year will be 17 million euro. As we engage on a 2-year basis, we are looking at a total of 34 million euro for 2021 and 2022. Being a stable and predictable donor, Belgium again commits to the critical, timely, and life-saving nature of the CERF. Finally, may I ask you, after the member states have made their statement, to give the floor to the representative of the delegation of Flanders to announce the pledge of the government of Flanders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Yes, we will certainly do that. And thank you very much indeed for your pledge. Again, a pledge going beyond a year, which I greatly appreciate. Now we're going to try again now to reach Minister Lena El Sheikh in Khartoum, where the CERF has been very busy this year. So, Lena, I know you're on a different device, so please go ahead, and I hope we can hear from you.
Hi, I hope you can hear me now.
We can.
Yes,
fantastic.
Great. Fantastic. So the struggle is real, starting with infrastructure. So thank you so much, Mark and everyone, Excellencies. I'm glad to be here and trying to catch up. A big and a sincere thanks to all our friends in the international community and the United Nations for the continued solidarity and support to the people of Sudan. And on behalf of the transitional government, I just I wanted to express my appreciation. And I know that I thank you for the opportunity after the pledging has started, but I had two asks. The first ask was the continued support to the Central Emergency Response Fund, as large-scale and often unpredictable emergencies and life-saving needs will continue to be with us for some time. It was interesting listening to Bangladesh and all that they've been through, and I'm telling you, we've been through more. But it's been a tough time. It's 2020 globally, I think, and for us in Sudan and going through the the transition and all these complex emergencies. I keep saying that we can be a case study, to be honest, this year. My second ask is at the same time that we continue to strengthen emergency response mechanisms such as the CERF, we also need to scale up our investment in building resilience of people. And I was happy to listen to some of the comments now around that, and it's important to address root causes and how can we build capacity. So on the impact of the CERF in Sudan, and I'm very grateful and we're grateful for the continued strong support to Sudan, and including the occasions during 2019 and 2020 in support of the COVID-19 response, where Sudan received 3.4 million under the COVID-19 UN block grant and 3 million under the COVID-19 NGO allocation. And also that we received 100 million, which is the largest single allocation in CERF's history. Thank you very much. And its positive impact that it had on our food insecurity, on malnutrition, protection of the most vulnerable. And after such a, the revolution, and I think everyone's been witnessing and following what's been happening in Sudan, and it's been quite a journey. But this really contributed to our agenda as a transitional government for peace building and for freedom and justice and for school for all, and basically including displaced and returnees. It focuses on different localities and different parts of Sudan. And I just wanted to quickly reflect on the context again on which the CERF was provided on. I just wanted to give a few examples of the program supported by the CERF. And I will share with you a little bit of our vision going forward. So 2020 has been an unprecedented year for the people of Sudan, as I just said. The people have been hit by multiple crises, starting by an economic crisis impacting on access of millions of people to food, medicine, and fuel. That was further compounded by deteriorating food insecurity, desert locusts, COVID-19, the worst flooding in a century, and most recently the arrival of around 50,000 refugees from Ethiopia, adding to more than 1.1 million refugees already hosted by Sudan. And I think, we've always had our, country and borders open to refugees and fellow brothers and sisters from nearby countries, and just the stories coming across from the east are just about how people, irrespective and despite all that we're going through, and we're going through such terrible times, to be honest, and the crisis economically and people struggling, but we still keep our homes open, and our country is everybody's welcome. So these multiple shocks had disproportionate impact on women, of course. And COVID-19, for example, the initial mitigation measures were very devastating for those working in the informal sector, the majority of whom are women. And that's why we need to still always focus on the most vulnerable, women, children, and people with disabilities. Secondly, the CERF supported critical programs that acted as a catalyst for support by other donors. And some of these examples are support to emergency school feeding programs in the eastern states. These are the same communities that are now hosting the refugees that recently arrived from Ethiopia. Support is providing entry points to social protection, where emergency school feeding is complemented by nutrition support, water, hygiene, and sanitation support, and health and nutritional awareness benefiting the wider community around the school. Also support to forcibly displaced people and host communities in Darfur. And I think now after the Juba peace agreement, it's something that's very important, that what are we and how are we getting support through the international community and UN agencies, and to be able to deliver on people's expectations on basic needs. Or also support to the COVID-19 response included establishment, rehabilitation of pluralization of isolation centers in different states, provision of basic equipment, infection prevention, control supplies, support for strengthening triage and promotion of risk communication, community engagement. And some of that was the timely response to the annual vector-borne disease outbreaks. I mean, whatever, I think this year we've been through all kinds of emergencies and disasters, we had chikungunya, Rift fever, circulating Kassala, Red Sea, and assisted in also controlling the spread of malaria to levels below those encountered during previous years. So what's next for us? Given that Sudan continues to be prone to disasters, our objective is to improve and scale up the government efforts in strengthening resilience of our people. This objective requires us to change the way we do business. We have already embarked on this journey to reform our humanitarian aid coordination system and our social protection programs to make it a whole government approach and a people-centered approach. To this regard, I want to thank OCHA and thank you, Mark, for the support that you are providing to us to achieve this reform and being there for us during this tough and messy transition, but we're getting there and we're very hopeful. And I want to say, let's have Sudan. I keep saying that, we can be an excellent, I said this morning, that we can be an excellent case study for, all kinds of disasters. But I think we can also be an excellent story for resilience. And on conclusion, I want to reiterate my asks for you all to continue your support to the CERF and the importance of ensuring continued progress towards the $1 billion CERF as agreed by the UN member states at the General Assembly in 2016. I think the $1 billion is a minimum in order to ensure that CERF can continue to respond to life-saving needs globally with fast, agile, and strategic allocations. I thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure on behalf of all of us, we would all like to extend to you our fullest solidarity. And thank you for explaining why the CERF is important to you. I'm pleased to give the floor now to the Minister for Development Cooperation for Denmark, His Excellency Mr. Flemming Møller Mortensen. Sir, you have the floor.
Everybody. It touches me deeply when the Secretary-General says that we are facing the greatest humanitarian challenge since the Second World War. The needs are enormous and we need global solidarity like never before. The CERF is a very important part of our toolbox to address these needs. Denmark is proud to provide 0.7% of our GDP for global development and humanitarian assistance. Part of these funds are used to support the CERF. We emphasize predictability and flexibility in our funding to ensure that it has the biggest impact. This is why I'm happy to announce that for the next 2 years, Denmark will provide annual fully flexible contributions of more than $27 million per year. I also hope to be able to release an additional contribution of $5.7 million before the end of this year, bringing our total grant for 2020 to more than $33 million. And we were happy to more than double our core contribution to OCHA this year, bringing our annual funding to $11.4 million. It is, however, a challenge that only 10 countries provide 94% of the funding. We urgently need more member states to contribute in order to ensure stable and predictable funding. That is required for the world to respond to the greatest humanitarian challenge since the Second World War. Denmark will continue to do our utmost. We will stand by the CERF and continue to be a trustworthy donor of predictable and flexible funds to the humanitarian efforts of the United Nations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, both for your pledge for 2021 and 2022, but also for the top up for the remainder of 2020. Many thanks indeed. We're going now to move to a message from His Excellency Mr. Vilas Skinnari, the Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade from Finland. Let's hear that message.
Secretary-General, Your Excellencies, humanitarians, dear colleagues. Let me start by thanking Secretary-General Guterres, Emergency Relief Coordinator, LOCAC, and all UN OCHA staff for their tireless work to help the most vulnerable during these most challenging times. Finland is very proud to be a long-time supporter of CERF. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the clear value of the fund. Fast and strategic allocations by CERF have had a key role in ensuring an effective response to the pandemic. In this respect, I would like to stress the importance of flexible, unearmarked funding from donors. CERF can also be a true change maker in the humanitarian sector. Defining persons with disabilities as a priority for the fund was an important step in making disability inclusion a key part of all humanitarian action. We hope to see more data soon on the results in this front. Finland really welcomes the recently announced CERF allocation to combat gender-based violence. Gender issues are an acutely underfunded area in humanitarian response, and we all need to do more for the well-being of women and girls. When taking office last year, my government committed to increase humanitarian funding. I'm very proud to say that despite the pandemic, we have been able to keep that promise. Furthermore, this year, Finland has increased its humanitarian funding by 40% to record high levels. It is an honor for me to make two pledges to CERF today. First of all, an additional contribution of 5.3 million euros for the ongoing year 2020. In addition to the 8 million euros we have already contributed. Secondly, and subject to the parliamentary approval, 8 million euros for the year 2021. I sincerely wish that our joint efforts will contribute to bringing relief and life-saving assistance to an increasing number of people in humanitarian need. Thank you so much.
So I thank the Minister very much indeed for his statement and his pledge. And I'm pleased now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Per-Olsson Frid, the State Secretary for International Development Cooperation in Sweden. Per, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We see a world today of where humanitarian needs and their global displacement are at unprecedented levels. Crises are more complex in their nature and increasingly protracted. Even though crises are still mostly linked to armed conflict, we also see a growing number of them springing from climate change. Now, Excellencies and colleagues, this is under our watch. We have indeed a huge responsibility to turn these negative developments around, to put an end to this growing number of procrastinated armed conflicts and end and better our fight against climate change. But we also need to step up and try to bridge the gap that we see in humanitarian funding. And although humanitarian funding has increased over time, there is a mismatch between the needs and what we have at our disposal. As a result, the number of underfunded humanitarian crises is growing, and Sweden is deeply concerned about this development. We must redouble efforts to broaden the donor base, but also be more innovative, such as with anticipatory action and effective with the funding that we have at our disposal, ensuring that we get the most bang out of the bucks. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the importance of flexible funding for organizations to act fast and forcefully and to allocate resources where they are most needed in the right time. In this regard, the CERF plays a key role since its resources can be deployed flexibly and rapidly. In light of this growing humanitarian need, Sweden decided to forward an additional contribution of 38 million Swedish kronor to CERF for 2020 within the framework that we have our strategic partnership agreement between Sweden and the CERF. And Sweden remains committed to honor this agreement with CERF with multi-annual contributions of core support. For 2021, this amounts to a pledge of 556 million Swedish kroners, around 75 million US dollars. And this is a pledge as a part of our strategic partnership agreement, which is a multi-year agreement of core support. And according to this, the amount, which is a total of around 278 billion Swedish kronor between 2018 and 2021. And with this pledge, Sweden restates its commitment to remain a committed and strategic partner to CERF, to the humanitarian principles, and to end humanitarian suffering around the world. We look forward to continue this cooperation with OCHA and the management there, with you, Mark, for this vital fund and its focus on life-saving interventions around the globe. Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your important statement and pledge and confirmation of Sweden's long-term support, which we greatly value for the CERF. I'm really pleased now to be able to give the floor to my friend and colleague, Mr. Chu Dong-yu, the Director General of the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. Dong-yu, please go ahead, you have the floor.
Okay, now, thank you, Mark. Dear friend, excellencies, I started to commend the OCHA and the CERF for your extraordinary jobs you have led in this extraordinary year. And also to generous donors for your timely and flexible support. And once in a generation, the locust upsurge has swept across the horn of Africa and threatened the livelihood far beyond into Asia and West Africa. A global pandemic has brought the lives and the livelihood to a sudden halt, pushed millions into the unemployment and poverty, worsened the already high level of acute hunger. The shocks of 2020 will reverberate long into 2021. I'm deeply concerned about rising number of people facing emergency level of acute food insecurity in the vulnerable countries. Unless we act now and act at the scale, when the people began to move from the crisis to emergencies and from emergencies to catastrophic levels of acute hunger, a key driving force is the irreversibly depletion of their livelihood. And this is why FAO is advocating so strongly to invest in emergency agricultural interventions, early warning, early action, help to minimizing the impact. Hand-in-hand initiative, geospatial platform, driven by big data, offering the deliverable service to the vulnerable members, about the 53 countries in the world. So 4 out of 5 people living in the food crisis context rely on some form of agricultural for their survival. I'm talking about survival. And rescuing those livelihoods, not only saving their lives today, but give them hope for tomorrow. CERF has been instrumentally supporting livelihood saving interventions in 2020, providing almost 44 million to this end. We look forward to strengthening our partnership. In 2020, CERF took the first step to moving early action from the much discussed at the time, ultimately small-scale activities to a broad scale. This generally anticipation reduces the impact of crisis in countries like Bangladesh and Somalia. You already heard. So the donors, you are counting on the CERF, and the CERF is really offered to you with the solid results and the influential results. CERF support was also critical in catalyzing funding for the desert locust control operation, and that protected over 2.5 million tons of the food in Horn of Africa and Yemen alone. Enough to feed more than 16.5 million people for a year. If we're counting on the CERF and OCHA at large, and counting on the leadership by the Mark Lockock, my friend, and to continue upscale this support to anticipatory action and saving livelihood so we can alert with the situation of crisis and protect the lives of millions of people ahead, which need the most. Thank you. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much indeed, Dong Yu. I'm now pleased to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Colin Brophy, the Minister of State for Overseas Development and the Diaspora in Ireland. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And let me start by thanking you all for the excellent introduction and discussion. The CERF High-level Pledging Conference offers an important moment of reflection. 2020 was a year of immense challenges and human suffering, but also one of impressive efforts and achievements in the most difficult of circumstances. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of those involved. In responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, the CERF is a beacon of a global solidarity. It led from the front and by example. It was fast, flexible and innovative. CERF's support for the UN logistical hubs was the backbone of the COVID response. Ireland was proud to be part of this. As the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded, pre-existing humanitarian needs continued. The CERF responded to protected crises such as the Central African Republic and the DRC, and to new crises such as the desert locust outbreak in East Africa and Cyclone Harold in Vanuatu. The strong focus on SIDS and the protracted crisis chimes well with Ireland's priorities. Ireland applauds the increase in CERF funding to education in emergencies, protection and gender-based violence. Such activities are truly life-saving and essential to protect and support women and girls in particular. The CERF's work on anticipatory action that Ireland was part of as a member of the chair of the CERF Advisory Group is a very welcome development. Delivering a more efficient and dignified response for less is a win-win situation. The recent CERF allocation to stave off famine in 6 countries is a strong example. The prevention of an impending famine is truly the most humanitarian approach and one that Ireland supports wholeheartedly. Ireland is immensely proud of its long-standing support to the CERF. We have contributed to the fund every year since it was established, and we are the 8th largest supporter. I'm delighted to announce that our financial commitment to CERF remains strong. In 2021, we will enter the 3rd year of our multi-annual partnership. Our annual contribution of 10 million will be provided early next year. While there are no humanitarian solutions to today's humanitarian crisis, the provision of protection and humanitarian assistance is a lifeline to the most vulnerable, and the CERF is central to this. When Ireland joins the UN Security Council next month for a 2-year term, you can be assured that we will consistently and tirelessly make the case for the principled humanitarian action and access for those most in need. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And again, for confirmation of Ireland's strong support for humanitarian action, especially through the CERF. I'm now pleased to be able to join you in listening to a message we have from His Excellency Nikos Dendias, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Greece.
Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, I would like to express my appreciation for having the opportunity to participate in this high-level pledging event in order to support the United Nations Central Emergency Response. Established by the United Nations General Assembly in 2005 as the United Nations Global Emergency Response Fund, CERF enables humanitarian responders to deliver life-saving assistance whenever and wherever crises strike. CERF is one of the fastest and most effective ways to ensure that urgently needed humanitarian assistance reaches people caught up in crisis. Its unmatched speed, predictability, and flexibility makes life-saving aid and protection accessible to millions of people involved in new emergencies, into prolonged crises, as well as to forgotten crises, which do not receive adequate funding from other means. The fund has been also actively involved in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic from the first month of 2020 by allocating nearly 600 million. As an essential enabler of global humanitarian action, CERF's rapid response window allows country teams to kickstart relief efforts immediately in a coordinated and prioritized response when a new crisis emerges. CERF's window for underfunded emergency helps scale up and sustain protracted relief operations to avoid critical gaps when no other funding is available. Greece has always appreciated the effective way in which CERF funds emergency humanitarian response operations, and also guarantees that funds are allocated properly, timely, and transparently. Greece is included in its list of important donors, such as it has contributed a total of 1,750,000 to the fund from 2006 to 2013. In this vein, we support the United Nations General Assembly resolution back in 2016, as well as the call of Secretary-General António Guterres during the 2018 General Assembly to expand CERF's annual funding target to 1 billion, commensurate with today's humanitarian needs. For all these reasons, my country, recognizing the significant contribution and impact of CERF in our global effort responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, has decided to continue to demonstrate its solidarity to the fund with a symbolic contribution. Thank you.
Thank you to the Minister for his statement. I'm pleased now to give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Naguib Mansour Al-Oj, who's the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation from Yemen. Please go ahead. Excellency, I think your mute is still on. If you could try again to take it off.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I would like to send a message in Arabic, please. Starting. السيد أنطونيو غوتيريس الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة.
Distinguished Secretary-General António Guterres, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking you for holding this meeting. We are very grateful to the Secretary-General and Mr. Mark Lowcock as well for their tireless efforts to help us overcome this crisis as a result of the Houthi coup d'etat. We welcome the efforts of the CERF in the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and we thank them for helping us to combat COVID-19. With the spread of unprecedented humanitarian crises worldwide, it is essential for the international community to continue to provide support to this fund in order to overcome these crises and challenges, including climate change and other illnesses. We thank the fund for the $100 million given to Yemen and for other countries in need as a result of famine, crises, economic deterioration, and climate change, as well as other illnesses. There are major challenges in Yemen because of the negative activities carried out by the Houthis. And when we speak in terms of figures, we can say that there are 3.6 million people who need assistance in Yemen. Yemen is facing dangers caused by locust swarms. We have 300 million refugees in the Horn of Africa who are bearing this very heavy burden. This burden is being borne by an already very tired Yemen. And turning to the food situation in Yemen, there has been a complete breakdown. 16 million people are facing famine. $63 on average is needed to feed these people in need. We hope that international assistance will continue to be forthcoming through the United Nations, through the CERF Fund in particular. At this time, we are submitting a symbolic $10 million from Yemen as our pledge to CERF, while at the same time, we hope that this fund will be able to meet the financing needs agreed upon by the General Assembly, namely $1 billion, and we invite the international community to continue with these efforts. Thank you.
And I really want to recognize the fact that notwithstanding the challenges your country faces, you attach importance to the fact that the CERF is a fund not just for all, but by all. And we greatly appreciate your symbolic contribution, which you've just announced. So thank you. I'm pleased now to be able to join you in listening to a message we have from His Excellency Mr. Frans Fayot, who's the Minister for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs from Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Secrétaire-Général Adjoint.
Mr. Under-Secretary-General, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today we are meeting with a common goal, ensuring more effective, active, predictable humanitarian assistance, which meets the needs of the affected population, affected by various types of crises that are increasingly changeable in nature. Luxembourg is following with concern the deteriorating humanitarian situation around the world, a situation which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We were forced to note with consternation that the number of people affected by humanitarian crises has reached a new sad record in 2020. This should remind us of our collective responsibility to alleviate this suffering and to preserve the dignity of those peoples affected by crises, as well as reducing the losses of human lives. We need to do what we can to avoid crises being repeated and to support the people who need protection and humanitarian assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our duty to allow humanitarian actors to respond rapidly and upstream. The rapid, effective disbursement of humanitarian funds plays a fundamental role in this respect. It is now clear, and that is why, since its creation in 2006, Luxembourg has supported the CERF, and why over the years we have increased our financial support. What's more, in line with our commitments from the World Humanitarian Summit and the Compact, we decided to provide the fund with predictability through our support by signing biannual reports since 2017. Mr. Under-Secretary-General, it is with pleasure that today I can announce that we intend to continue this good practice for the next 2 years with a contribution of 10 million euros to the CERF for the period 2021-2022. Luxembourg is and will continue to be a reliable partner of the CERF. Today, I reiterate our full support for the CERF and for the important role that it plays, in particular in the context of under-financed and forgotten crises, as well as for its upstream actions that it has recently undertaken. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to Luxembourg for the pledge just announced there by the Minister, and I'm pleased now to give the floor to my friend and colleague, the Director General of the International Organization of Migration, António Guterres. Antonio, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to join you because the CERF is for IOM a critical partner. As of end of November, IOM has received over $66 million for 13 projects in 26 countries for shelter and NFI, WASH, CCM, protection, and else, which ranks our organization as the 5th highest recipient of CERF funds in 2020. I would like also to emphasize the decision that has been taken by the Emergency Relief Coordinator to allocate $25 million from the CERF via IOM to support 24 NGOs in their efforts to provide life-saving response to the global COVID-19 pandemic. This marks the first time that NGOs have been given direct access to CERF funding in line with the concerns of localization enshrined in the Grand Bargain. The project is expected to benefit 1.38 million individuals in 6 countries, namely Bangladesh, Haiti, Libya, Sudan, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Indeed, this new way of working has allowed critical humanitarian funding to flow into areas that were previously hard to reach, and highlights yet again that CERF works with great speed and flexibility to ensure life-safe assistance and protection for most of those that are most at risk, most particularly women and girls. I also wish to highlight the $15 million of CERF allocation for anticipatory action for food insecurity in Somalia, through which IOM and other agencies have been able to address severe drought shocks under the anticipatory action framework, demonstrating the value of such mechanism by dramatically reducing the suffering and the cost associated with the developing crisis. Excellencies, with the growing number of crises worldwide, it is particularly important that donors pledge generously to ensure that the humanitarian system has systematic funding availability to meet the needs of migrants and other crisis-affected people and help to build resilience in the communities. I thank you, and I look forward to continuing our strong partnership with the CERF. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Antonio. And I'm pleased that we can now move to Afghanistan to hear from Her Excellency Dr. Karima Hamid Faryaabi, the Minister of Economy. Madam Minister, please go ahead.
Excellencies, Chair of the sessions, UN delegates, state representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to avail this opportunity to thank the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund participants and contributors for their generous support to Afghanistan so far. The COVID-19 pandemic has reflected a great deal of health and economic burden on all countries, especially in conflict-affected and disaster-prone Afghanistan. Human casualties due to terrorist attacks and post-COVID-19. Economic burdens of 44% of the food insecurity, 18.6% unemployment, 47% poverty rate, and 90% of the population surviving daily within less than $2 indicate that the human security condition in Afghanistan is of a high concern. During such a harsh time, the government of Afghanistan thanks the United Nations organization this high-level pledging meeting. Knowing the importance of these high-level events in such a critical times, the government of Afghanistan would like to contribute affordable amount to the CERF. Our permanent mission in UN will later announce the amount. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Minister. And again, more illustration of the fact that the CERF is not just for all, but it's by all as well. So thank you for your solidarity. I'm pleased to give the floor next to Iceland, His Excellency Martin Eilsson, the Permanent Secretary of State in Reykjavik. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to address this year's high-level conference of the Central Emergency Response Fund. The importance of time-critical and life-saving humanitarian assistance has perhaps never been as pertinent as now. This year, humanitarian needs have risen to unprecedented levels, with the health, economic, and the social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbating existing vulnerabilities and creating new ones. The CERF's impressive allocation model makes it particularly well equipped to address this crisis, allowing humanitarian actors to act quickly and direct resources to underfunded emergencies. Indeed, the fund's strategic role in a world of competing humanitarian emergencies is well established, which is why this year Iceland entered into its second multi-year framework agreement with CERF, allowing for predictable annual allocations to the fund. In line with this framework, I'm pleased to confirm Iceland's allocation to the fund for 2021 in the amount of 50 million Icelandic kroners. In addition, given the unprecedented circumstances we are confronted with, I'm happy to announce an addition of almost double of that amount to the fund for 2020, or 40 million US dollars, the same amount. This will bring our total contribution to this year to $750 million US dollars. Mr. Chair, as a strong advocate for human rights and gender equality, I want to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of a systematic focus on women and girls. There is no denying that in humanitarian crisis, women and girls become increasingly vulnerable to gender-based violence and other forms of exploitation. And when poverty and hunger rise, women and girls are usually negatively affected. COVID-19 has further aggravated this negative spiral. I would therefore like to conclude by thanking Mr. Lovcock for the CERF's enhanced focus on these critical issues and ensure of Iceland's continued support in this regard. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And we move now to hear a message from His Excellency Mr. Ham Sang-wook, Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs in the Republic of Korea.
I would like to first thank Under Secretary-General Lowcock for convening this pledging event for the CERF in the midst of the unrelenting COVID-19 pandemic. This year, the world has been facing the deadliest pandemic in our generation, as it continues to grapple with the ongoing humanitarian crisis arising from climate change, conflicts, and underdevelopment, to name a few. It has never been more vital for the international community to come together to tackle the pandemic while addressing the ever-growing humanitarian needs as set out in the 2021 Global Humanitarian Overview. It is in this context that we would like to commend the swift and flexible allocations disbursed by OCHA to support the humanitarian response to the pandemic, not to mention existing crises that are often underfunded and neglected. And on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of joining the OECD DAC, the Republic of Korea would like to reaffirm our strong commitment to contribute to global efforts to address humanitarian crisis. This year, Korea contributed over $100 million to help countries combat COVID-19. At the same time, we continue to increase our support for other emergencies and protracted humanitarian crises around the world. In doing so, OCHA's pooled funding mechanisms, CERF and CBPFs, served as key channels for our humanitarian response. In particular, Korea has been a steadfast supporter of CERF since its establishment. The widening gap between humanitarian needs and funding, as well as the increasingly complex nature of today's crisis, call for more effective and coordinated assistance among relevant stakeholders on the ground. Therefore, we believe that CERF, as a tool for facilitating coordinated humanitarian efforts, has a greater role to play in this regard. And today, to respond to the call by Secretary-General António Guterres for increased funding for CERF, the Republic of Korea pledges to contribute $6 million in 2021 and to further increase our contributions in the years to come. I thank you very much.
I'm pleased now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Andres Rundu, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Estonia. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mark. Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we all agree that 2020 has been an exceptional year. The global health crisis brought along by COVID-19 will be remembered and its consequences felt for many years to come. The coronavirus continues to ravage the world as we speak, raising the humanitarian needs to all-time high. The Central Emergency Response Fund has played a major role in enabling rapid humanitarian response when emergencies occur for more than 14 years now. The CERF has rightfully earned the trust and confidence of the United Nations member states. When alleviating the human suffering in the acute and protracted crises around the world, considering the long-term impact of COVID-19, the grants are needed more than ever. It is essential that CERF's humanitarian partners will be able to continue to provide life-saving assistance, such as healthcare, water and sanitation, food assistance and nutrition support, shelter and protection, the crisis-affected people, when no other funding is available. Estonia, as the signatory to the Grand Bargain commitment, fully supports the localization of the humanitarian aid. The United Nations pooled funds have proved to be the most agile and efficient financing instruments, supporting local and early action. Estonia has been a long-standing contributor to the CERF. Today, I am delighted to reaffirm our continuing support by announcing that Estonia has decided to raise its unearmarked contribution by 50% and make our pledge multi-annual. Estonia will donate 150,000 euros for the activities of the fund in 2021 and another 150 euros for its activities in 2022. We would also encourage other smaller donors to follow suit and step up. Estonia firmly believes that it is crucial to help those most in need. We will continue to do our part to make sure that despite COVID-19, we live up to the commitment of reaching the furthest behind first, as enshrined in 2030 agenda. I thank you.
Andres, thank you very much indeed for that. And I'm pleased now to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Marta Zielkowski, the Deputy Foreign Minister and State Secretary in Norway. Marta, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mark. Under Secretary-General, Excellencies, dear colleagues. Norway is a strong and committed supporter of CERF. CERF is not only delivering on its mandate of being rapid, efficient, and needs-based, CERF is also an agenda setter and in the forefront when it comes to finding innovative solutions and new ways of working. Norway is proud to be the fourth largest donor to CERF since the establishment. And in this unpredictable year of 2020, CERF has really proven its case. When the COVID-19 crisis hit us and everything else faced an abrupt halt, CERF took the lead by quickly releasing funds. In this way, operational agencies were able to ensure continued operations. I'd like to applaud the pertinent and important allocation to UNFPA and UN Women. Strengthening women and women-led organizations is vital to empower women and fight SGBB in humanitarian crisis. Through this allocation, CERF has raised awareness about the joint efforts needed in the months to come. It is a call for action. Norway stands ready to do our part. We expect others to follow, including partners receiving unearmarked funding. With the recent crucial allocation to combat famine, CERF looks ahead and gives us a stern and dark reminder of what 2021 will bring of challenges. Mr. Chair, today I'm proud to announce that Norway will increase its contribution to CERF in 2020 with 58 million Norwegian kroner, which makes our total contribution in 2020 a record high 476 million Norwegian kroner, nearly $55 million. Norway and CERF signed a 4-year agreement in 2018. As part of this commitment, we will furthermore disperse 420 million Norwegian kroner early in 2021. Predictable and early funding is vital to ensure the effectiveness of the fund. Lastly, let me thank you, Mark, for your work, and I can assure you that you have our continued support. Thank you.
Well, Martha, thank you very much indeed. I really greatly appreciate what you said and what Norway is doing. Many of you have commented on the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the world's most vulnerable people. And I'm really pleased now that we can hear from my friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Ryan, Executive Director for Health Emergencies at the World Health Organization. Mike, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to you for your personal leadership on this and so many other issues on the humanitarian front, and especially in COVID. And greetings from Dr. Sosef Fall, who's with me as well, our ADG for response. Over the past decade, I mean, CERF has truly proven itself to be a lifeline to people and communities hit by conflict, natural disasters, and disease outbreaks. Millions of lives have been saved by CERF, resourcing interventions in the early days of crisis, and it's created the solid foundations too that the humanitarian funding that comes after it is being well spent. It creates a positive foundation for good investment later. The right investments early create the infrastructure for a return on later investments. This year, as soon as WHO declared the public health emergency of international concern on the 30th of January, CERF began to provide WHO with an exceptional $20 million to provide immediate assistance for health systems were the least prepared to respond, and mainly in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Using those funds, we were able to fully equip local health facilities to test patients, to care for patients in countries like Niger, Somalia, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. We trained thousands of healthcare workers in contact tracing in several countries using these funds, set up rapid investigation teams, established risk communications in communities in places like Chad and Syria and in Nigeria. The COVID pandemic has proven the case beyond doubt that being prepared, acting early and in a systematic way for health emergencies in particular is vital. CERF is an important part of that architecture, not just for humanitarian response, but for response in general. By investing in CERF today, you're equipping the world with the best tools for tackling emergencies, humanitarian emergencies tomorrow. We've seen in this COVID pandemic and CERF has proven its worth in 100 other crises, seen and unseen, causing human suffering in many corners of the globe. It is a beacon of hope, Mark, and I know that you're extremely definitive in the way you use this, very clear in the criteria that have been set out, and extremely prudent in how this mechanism is used. But it has driven responses when they need to be driven early, and it provides that certainty for response. It's highly complementary with our contingency fund for epidemics, which is the mechanism which we use as well for early response. And the life-saving criteria within CERF are fantastic, and the ability for us to coordinate early action truly complementary. So again, with thanks to you and your team, and to the donors who continue to contribute to this vital fund. Thank you all.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. And I'm pleased now that we can hear a message from Her Excellency Emanuela Del Rey, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Italy.
Dear friends, over the last years, humanitarian needs have been continuously increasing. A few days ago, the Global Humanitarian Overview for 2021 enhanced the growing challenges ahead of us. 1 in 33 people worldwide will need humanitarian assistance and protection. This is the highest figure in decades. CERF has proven to be an effective tool in providing timely financial support in case of unforeseen and underfunded emergencies and humanitarian crises. This has been proved, for instance, by the UN willingness to use CERF to alleviate the suffering of people recently affected by Hurricane Eta in Central America, as well as by the support to the COVID-19 response. I really wish to commend the Under-Secretary-General and Emergency Relief Coordinator, my friend Mark Lowcock, for his remarkable efforts in mobilizing timely and appropriate financial resources through the CERF when needed. CERF can also provide an important contribution when anticipatory action is needed, after the early warning phase when impacts are imminent. I share the views that anticipatory action can be cheaper, more effective, and more humane. Italy supports CERF, and therefore I am pleased to announce that Italy will increase its contribution to CERF by pledging €6 million for the year 2021. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to the Vice Minister there for her pledge and increasing support for the CERF. And I'm pleased now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ali Abdullah Al-Dabar, the Deputy Director General for the Qatar Fund for Development. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Central Emergency Response Fund has truly continued keeping its promise to act as fund for all by all, delivering rapid response whenever and wherever a crisis strikes and sustaining critically unfunded forgetting crises across the globe. The state of Qatar considers CERF as one of the most effective and efficient investments in humanitarian action and transformative humanitarian funding mechanism. The fund's ability to ensure responsive, coordinated, and principles life-saving aid is available at almost crucial times and reach people caught up in crisis is well aligned with the State of Qatar international cooperation goal and commitment to deliver on the promise to leave no one behind. Putting words into action, the State of Qatar has been a consistent partner and donor to the CERF since 2008. Qatar provided more than 16 million to the fund from 2014 to 2020. We are also proud to have been a member of the advisory group of CERF and chairing the donor support group during this year. Our support to CERF is a reflection to our collective commitment to respond effectively to growing need, to support people trapped in crisis, in particular those furthest behind. The pandemic has added yet an additional layer of hardship to vulnerable populations. OCHA's Global Humanitarian Overview indicates the number of people in need of a humanitarian assistance has yet again significantly increased, surpassing last year's stagnated figures. We seize this opportunity to commend the vital role of CERF in providing an urgent and life-saving assistance, particularly during COVID-19. And we wish to express our gratitude to all actors who make this response possible, the donors community, humanitarian workers, the OCHA team, and others. Recognizing the important role played by CERF, we are proud that the State of Qatar is among the first countries to provide support to the fund since its inception, providing more than 12 million to the fund in 2011-2016, in addition to 5 million contribution for the 5 period 2017 to 2021. Reaffirming our commitment to support OCHA in our effort to be a consistent and predictable donor, we are pleased to announce that the State of Qatar will disburse the $1 million to support CERF Humanitarian Response Plan for 2021. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm pleased now to give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Desiree Schweitzer, the Director General for Development Cooperation in Austria. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Secretary-General, Excellencies, dear colleagues. Just a week ago, the Global Humanitarian Overview for 2021 was launched. According to the report, we are faced with unprecedented levels of human suffering as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic and its devastating social, economic, and political effects. The risk of a reversal of the positive trends of the past decades in the attainment of our joint development goals is the new reality that we are facing. Austria, in response to this dramatic development, has doubled its foreign disaster relief fund in 2020 and is committed to further increase its humanitarian assistance in coming years. In this challenging context, CERF has proven to be an indispensable humanitarian funding mechanism with global reach and impact. It provides timely, life-saving funding and strengthens the ability of the UN and the Emergency Relief Coordinator to ensure a coordinated response by the humanitarian system to urgent humanitarian needs in sudden onset and forgotten humanitarian crises. Austria particularly appreciates the efforts made in the framework of the CERF to address the gender dimension of humanitarian action, as COVID-19 has shown a spotlight on the full extent of gender inequality and women's and girls' exposure to gender-based violence. Recognizing the achievements of CERF, I'm glad to announce the recent decision of the Austrian government to contribute 1 million euros in 2020 and pledge a similar amount for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm pleased to give the floor now to Mariette Schuurman, who's the Director for Stability and Humanitarian Aid in the Netherlands, but who is also the chair of the CERF Advisory Group. So Mariette, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And let me begin by thanking our hosts for organizing this conference. Indeed, as you mentioned, I had the honor to take on the role of chair of the CERF Advisory Group mid-year, and just a few months after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that capacity, I've seen firsthand the extraordinary and critical role CERF has played in the response to that pandemic. CERF has made the difference by being flexible, fast, effective, and innovative. It filled the gaps where funding was otherwise not available. And as Brigitte, my DG, already explained, the support of the Netherlands for CERF is for us a no-brainer. We decided to top up our contribution for 2020, the contribution that was initially foreseen in our multi-year arrangement, with nearly 60% in response to the COVID-19 response. And the latest top-up for this year of 8 million brings us to a total contribution of $87 million, making us, as you mentioned, for this year, the second contributor to CERF. And at the same time, while we welcome all the additional funding this year that has been made available in the light of the pandemic, and we're encouraged to see that more and more of CERF's donors commit to predictable and flexible funding, CERF deserves structurally more and more diversified support. And this is also a consistent ask from the Dutch Parliament. This is essential first and foremost to those in need, but also to allow humanitarian workers to continue to save as many lives as possible. And I would like to take this opportunity to applaud humanitarian workers that risk their lives on a daily basis and were faced with unprecedented challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now let me come to our pledge. The Humanitarian Needs Overview 2021 indicates a further and honestly staggering, if not daunting, increase of needs in 2021, with particularly concern for worldwide food insecurity and a threat of famine in several chronic crisis situations. In the light of those needs, the Netherlands will in 2021 Finally, the Netherlands calls for continued improvement and promotion of the CERF to enhance its catalytic function and attract new contributors, be they governments, foundations, companies, or private citizens. Let us work harder and better together to invest in humanity and make CERF truly a fund, a 1 billion fund for all, by all. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Maria, very much indeed. For the Netherlands, exceptional levels of support for the CERF financially and in so many other ways. We move now to Paris, to France, and I'm pleased to give the floor to His Excellency, Monsieur Jean-Marc Serre-Charlet, the Deputy Director for UN Affairs. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire-Général.
Thank you, USG for Humanitarian Affairs, dear Mark. Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to echo those who have spoken before me to thank OCHA for convening this event and also for their action, the work they do every day for the most vulnerable in dangerous areas. And France very much appreciates the work that you do. The CERF is one of the greatest humanitarian success stories of the United Nations. It symbolizes the vital solidarity on the part of the international community to respond to humanitarian crises. It has once again shown how much added value it has in 2020 because it had to respond in an agile and swift fashion to the effects of COVID-19. Given the growing humanitarian needs around the world, the CERF needs to play an even greater role in the years to come. This is why I would like to share with you today France's intention to strengthen its commitment to the fund. Contribution will be substantially increased in 2021 and in the years to come. The figures are still under discussion by our Parliament, but I do have good news. I will have good news soon for OCHA and for the CERF. This commitment is consistent with the large increase in our humanitarian contributions, which will be tripled in 2018 and between 2018 and 2022. Also, this is fully in line with the importance that we attach to multilateralism. And the CERF is a perfect illustration thereof in the humanitarian field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, we look forward to hearing from you in more detail shortly, as you say. Thank you very much indeed. I give the floor now to His Excellency, Monsieur Soufiane Mimouni, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative for Algeria. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank OCHA for organizing this event. My thanks and congratulations go also to the Secretary-General for his inspiring remarks, which prove, if need be, that this event is timely. My delegation acknowledges and fully supports the role of the CERF as the world's global emergency fund, delivering fast and effective life-saving assistance whenever and wherever crises hit. The year 2020 is like no other years. The persistence of conflicts and natural disasters compounded with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic have created a devastating blast of the people in need of humanitarian assistance, whose number will hit the record of 235 million people in 2021. The global humanitarian overview indicates that the number of people at risk of starvation has doubled and levels of extreme poverty have risen for the first time in 22 years. This shows the need to devote increased resources to promote durable solutions and addressing the root causes of forced displacement, starting with conflict. It also shows that a reliable and sustainable humanitarian UN system is needed now more than ever. The CERF is crucial in this regard as it promotes early action and response to reduce loss of life and strengthen humanitarian response in underfunded crises. Algeria remains attached to the principle of international solidarity and continue to host and provide protection and assistance to refugees who find rescue in its territory, including the Sahrawi refugees. We spared no efforts to ensure that all the refugees have access to essential services, and we have stepped up our humanitarian aid to respond to their specific needs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Algeria also continues to provide humanitarian and medical aid on a regular basis to many brotherly countries, particularly in its neighboring region. In light of the above and convinced by the need to step up our commitment to the CERF, I am pleased to announce that Algeria, as in previous years, has decided to make a financial contribution to be determined later in order to support the humanitarian action of this fund towards the forcibly displaced person in the world. And I thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And again, of course, we look forward to hearing further from you. Now, we heard earlier from Bangladesh, from Brak. Now we have an opportunity to hear from the government of Bangladesh. I believe we have the permanent representative, Her Excellency Ms. Rabab Fatima. But please, Bangladesh, go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Under-Secretary General, for giving me the floor. In fact, my PR, Ambassador Rabab Fatima, is busy for other preoccupations, so I am replacing her to state here. So at the outset, I wish to thank OCHA for convening today's high-level pledging event. We commend the leadership of you and also greatly appreciate CERF's globally dedicated team for their invaluable support during this crisis period. CERF has proven to be a very important instrument of UN in responding to humanitarian emergencies in an effective and fast manner. As we struggle to address the unprecedented consequences of COVID-19 on human lives and sufferings, the utility of CERF cannot be overstated. During the COVID-19 crisis, the humanitarian support assistance could be ensured in many societies, from health-related support to humanitarian livelihood assistance, from ensuring continuity of critical supply chain to access to food. Ensuring that priority is given to those who are most in need and providing well-coordinated response have been the key elements of CERF's work in the past, and we hope they will remain to be so in the future as we join to further strengthen the fund. We all agree that CERF is working very well, Yet there is perhaps further room for efficiency gains. We expect that it will push for innovative and more evidence-based planning in delivering rapid response for protection and life-saving assistance wherever and whenever crisis arises. Its assessment of the crisis also needs to be backed by precise and real-time data from the ground. At the same time, closer coordination between its disbursement arms and national governments is required to bring further qualitative improvements. Bangladesh is grateful to receive CERF funding. We are also grateful to CERF for funding the humanitarian needs of the Rohingyas at the camps in Cox's Bazar. CERF is playing a critical complementary role to other humanitarian funding for the Rohingyas at the camps. Convinced of usefulness of the fund and heeding to the call of the Secretary-General to invest more in CERF in light of the ever-increasing global humanitarian needs, Bangladesh has been making modest contribution to CERF. Bangladesh believes CERF needs more support. Therefore, in continuation of our commitment, we are pleased to announce that Bangladesh would be contributing $25,000 to CERF as unearmarked flexible fund for the year 2021. Given its convening role as a humanitarian fund with global reach and our very positive experience with CERF, Bangladesh should continue to extend our unwavering support to CERF for its worldwide efforts to save the distressed humanity. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We now go to Equatorial Guinea. His Excellency Ambassador António Guterres. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Ante todo,
at the outset, allow me to express here the thanks of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, Obiang Nguema Mabasogo, to the Secretary-General of the UN, António Guterres, for the invitation to participate in this important CERF High-level Pledging Event. For reasons beyond his control, he was not able to participate personally as he had hoped, and therefore has asked me to represent him. And therefore, on behalf of His Excellency, the President, I am making the following brief statement. The Republic of Equatorial Guinea welcomes the sound initiative to hold this virtual high-level meeting at a time when, as a result of the COVID-19 health crisis, the world needs even greater solidarity, and there must be support among countries of the world in a greater spirit of multilateralism. We must show unity with the most vulnerable peoples, and we must assist countries in conflict and help them through OCHA to overcome the difficulties that they are facing. And that is why the Republic of Equatorial Guinea congratulates the United Nations and praises the noble work that has been done for many years by OCHA and its coordinator, Mr. Mark Lowcock, through the CERF Fund. And that is why, despite the current economic and financial crisis in our country, the same crisis afflicting many other countries, the President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea has decided to respond to the appeal of the Secretary-General, and within our limited means, we are supporting the OCHA action and are making a firm pledge to contribute $25,000 to the CERF Fund next year, 2021, which will be increased year over year. Thank you.
We're now about halfway through. We have another 30 delegations who wish to take the floor. So with your permission, I will try to move us along a bit more quickly. I'm pleased now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mansour Al-Utaibi, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative for Kuwait. Mansour, please go ahead.
Thank you, Under Secretary General. Unfortunately, the ambassador is not able to join us today, so I'll be delivering the remarks on his behalf. Please allow me to continue in Arabic, sorry. أود أن أعرب عن تقدير وامتنان
in providing humanitarian assistance. We would also like to thank him and thank Mr. Lokok and the OCHA team for their efforts in providing humanitarian assistance despite the challenges faced over the past year, where the world is facing unprecedented challenges because of COVID-19. Despite these challenges, the CERF provided, the interpreter apologizes for the poor quality of sound. It's cutting off. In Kuwait provided more than $9 million to CERF since its establishment. We commend the efforts of OCHA headed by Mr. Lokok, the USG Mr. President. The world still faces the repercussions of conflicts, and we, the international community, should redouble our efforts. And here we reiterate our commitment to respond to the appeal of the United Nations. However, we see that the humanitarian needs are increasing because of conflicts and crises, and we stress the importance of mobilizing efforts, mobilizing funds to finance CERF to enable it to respond to these needs as quickly as possible. Kuwait believes in international coordinated efforts. The interpreter apologizes once again. The sound is very poor and it's cutting off. It's very difficult to grasp what the speaker is saying. Kuwait has contributed to CERF since its establishment to alleviate humanitarian suffering.
Thank you very much, Mark. Dear colleagues, it is an honor for me to participate in this event to show Spain's commitment to a clear sign of multilateralism, namely this fund. Humanitarian action which is coordinated, effective, multilateral and principled is what we need now more than ever. As we've heard from the Secretary-General, 2021 will be a pivotal year. 235 million people will be in need. 160 million will be in a situation of great vulnerability. Pre-existing humanitarian needs and recovery from the pandemic will require a fair, coordinated and socially just response, and that is the purpose of this fund. Last year, we saw once again that the fund works. It was able to reach the most vulnerable people affected by the pandemic, particularly in contexts of underfinancing, forgotten crises, or sudden emergencies. The fund is also committed to localization of NGOs and reaching people in situations of food insecurity and helping to ward off the immediate risk of starvation. We are very grateful for efforts to provide a funding window in response to preventing sexual and gender-based violence in the humanitarian context. This is a priority for my government, and we also welcome the support of this fund to those countries living in situations of violence and conflict and also facing climate change. Guatemala and its people have received support from the fund in response to tropical storms Eta and Iota. I cannot conclude without thanking the Secretary-General for his leadership and Mark Lowcock for managing the fund. The Government of Spain remains committed and will keep its contribution to the CERF in 2021. I would also like to highlight the role of Spanish decentralized cooperation, specifically the Catalan agencies and Basque cooperation agencies who will speak later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At present, the COVID-19 pandemic is spreading around the world, posing severe challenges to the health, security, and economic and social development of all countries. Conflicts remain unresolved in some regions. Extreme weather events occur frequently in many places. Food security situation is deteriorating in some countries, and the global humanitarian situation has become more grave. The CERF provides life-saving emergency assistance to people in need and has played an important role in alleviating the humanitarian crises caused by natural disasters, armed conflicts, and pandemics. China attaches great importance to the international humanitarian cause. Since the beginning of this year, China has made 2 cash contributions to the WHO totaling $50 million. The Chinese leaders have also pledged an additional $50 million in support of the COVID-19 Global Humanitarian Response Plan of the UN. Since 2007, China has contributed $500,000 annually to the CERF. This year's contributions have already been dispersed. These actions have fully demonstrated China's support for the UN and the global humanitarian endeavor. China will continue to support the work of the CERF and provide voluntary contributions to the fund within its capabilities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The Central Emergency Response Fund And this conference on it chimes with the worsening of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is an unprecedented challenge for the global community. This requires the international community to strengthen its cooperation to counter this danger and to address its socio-economic impacts. What's more, we need to prepare for the post-pandemic period and build a better world for all. We are aware of the severity of the situation. We therefore called for an emergency meeting within the Security Council to consider the impact of the pandemic around the world and to take the necessary measures to strengthen international solidarity, to curb this pandemic and to address its effects. What's more, along with France, we submitted a draft resolution which was adopted unanimously within the Security Council on the 1st of July 2020. Mr. Under-Secretary-General, in October 2018, Tunisia hosted the Arab-African Forum curbing the risks on disaster risk reduction along with the Arab League and the African Union. The Tunis Declaration resulting from this forum calls for inclusive sustainable development, taking into account the effects of disasters, and for measures to be taken urgently to develop and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies. At the national level in 2017, Tunisia began working with the World Food Programme to put in place a capacity building program for national actors to combat disasters as part of the global partnership to combat disasters. This partnership aims to help states in their efforts to develop a national plan to curb emergency disasters. The risks and challenges facing the world today require that we all strengthen the mechanisms of international cooperation and human solidarity, and that we promote multilateralism more effectively to reduce the effects of environmental and health crises and disasters on our national security systems. We thus need to increase the CERF's resources so that it is able to fulfill its mandate. Tunisia reiterates its commitment to supporting the activities of the fund, and we have provided assistance in kind to many brother countries affected by natural disasters. To conclude, we intend to provide contributions to the financing of the CERF. Thank you.